October 8th, 1918, 0421 hours. Argonne Forest, northeastern France. Corporal Alvin Hargrove crouched in the shattered remains of stone observation post a men called Dead Man's Perch, a nickname earned 3 times over the past 6 days. 3 different soldiers had tried to hold this position. 3 different soldiers had died here, picked off by German scouts who moved through the forest like ghosts, invisible until the killing shot. The post overlooked a critical forest trail junction. Whoever controlled the control movement through the sector of the Argonne, and the Germans wanted it back. They'd been probing for 2 nights straight, testing defenses, mapping positions, waiting for the right moment to overrun the American line. Hargrove had arrived 4 hours ago with orders to hold the post until dawn, alone, with nothing but his M1903 Springfield rifle, 200 rounds of ammunition, and the suffocating knowledge that every man who'd occupied this foxhole before him had lasted less than 12 hours. The forest was pitch black, fog clinging to the undergrowth like wet wool, and somewhere out there, 50 meters, 100, maybe less, German scouts were moving closer. Hargrove adjusted his grip on the Springfield, pressed his cheek to the cold stock, and steadied his breathing. He wasn't going to die here. He was going to turn this graveyard into something else entirely. A killing field the enemy would fear to cross. If you believe stories like this shouldn't vanish with time, subscribe. Let's keep their memory alive together. Alvin Hargrove was 26 years old, born in the high country of Montana, where the winters could kill you and the summers barely gave you time to prepare for the next freeze. His father had been a trapper and hunting guide who'd taught him to shoot before he could read, not as sport but as survival. In Montana, if you couldn't put meat on the table or drop a charging grizzly at 50 yards, you didn't make it through winter. Hargrove learned to read wind, estimate range by eye, compensate for elevation and temperature, and, most critically, to fire from unconventional positions. Prone in snow, kneeling on uneven ground, standing in high wind, even sitting wedged between rocks when that was the only cover available. By the time he was 15, he could hit a moving target at 300 yards with iron sights. No hesitation, no second shot needed. He didn't talk about it, didn't brag. Shooting wasn't a skill to him. It was a language, a conversation between rifle, bullet, distance, and target, and he was fluent in all of it. When he enlisted in 1917, the Army tested his marksmanship and immediately flagged him for sniper training, but Hargrove refused. He didn't want to be a specialist, didn't want to sit in hides and count kills. He wanted to be infantry, shoulder to shoulder with other men, doing the dirty work. The Army reluctantly assigned him to the 77th Infantry Division as a standard rifleman, and for a year, Hargrove's extraordinary shooting ability went largely unnoticed, buried in the chaos of training, transport, and deployment. The 77th Division, known as the Metropolitan Division because it was composed mostly of draftees from New York City, landed in France in April 1918 and spent the summer rotating through quiet sectors, learning trench warfare, absorbing casualties from random artillery and sniper fire. Hargrove kept his head down, followed orders, and didn't complain. But he noticed things. Noticed that most infantrymen couldn't hit a target past 100 yards. Noticed that officers treated rifles like clubs, useful only for bayonet charges and close-range panic firing. Noticed that the M1903 Springfield, a weapon capable of accurate fire out to 600 yards in skilled hands, was being wasted by men who'd barely qualified at 200. It frustrated him, but he said nothing. The Army had its doctrine, its training manuals, its way of doing things, and a corporal from Montana wasn't going to change that. So he kept quiet, kept shooting straight, and waited for the moment when his skills would matter. That moment came in late September 1918, when the 77th Division was ordered into the Argonne Forest as part of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive, the largest and bloodiest American operation of the war. The Argonne was a nightmare. 60 square miles of dense forest, ravines, and ridgelines, all of it defended by entrenched German machine gun nests, artillery positions, and elite scout units trained in forest warfare. The Germans had been fortifying Argonne for 4 years, turning it into a natural fortress where visibility dropped to 20 meters, where trails twisted into ambush points, where a single machine gun could pin down an entire company. American casualties were staggering. Units advanced a few hundred meters and then stalled, pinned down by fire they couldn't see. taking losses they couldn't prevent. Scouts sent forward to map enemy positions rarely came back. Radio communication was unreliable in the thick forest canopy. Artillery support was dangerous because friendly and enemy positions were too close, too tangled. It was, in every tactical sense, a grinding meat grinder where advancement was measured in yards and paid for in lives. And nowhere was this truer than along the forest trail junctions, the narrow paths where supply lines, reinforcements, and scout patrols had to move. Whoever controlled the junctions controlled the forest. And the Germans knew it. Dead Man's Perch was one such junction. A small stone observation post built into the side of a low ridge, overlooking a Y-shaped intersection of trails used by both sides to move men and material through the forest. It had changed hands 4 times in 2 weeks. The Americans would take it, hold it for a day or two, and then lose it to a German counterattack. The Germans would hold it, use it to ambush American patrols, and then lose it to American artillery. Back and forth, over and over, until the ground around the post was cratered and scorched and littered with shell casings and bloodstains. By early October 1918, nobody wanted to be assigned to Dead Man's Perch. It was a death sentence, a place where you went to die, not to fight. But the post was strategically critical, and the American command refused to abandon it, so they kept sending men, and the men kept dying, until they sent Alvin Hargrove. Hargrove arrived at the post on the evening of October 7th, relieving a corporal named Dietrich, who looked 10 years older than he probably was, face gaunt, hand shaking. Dietrich briefed him quickly. Germans own the forest at night. They send scouts, small teams, 2 or 3 men, sometimes alone, probing for weaknesses. They move quiet, real quiet. You won't hear them until they're on top of you. Last guy here lasted 8 hours. Guy before that, 6. You see movement, you shoot. You hear movement, you shoot. You feel movement, you shoot. Don't wait to confirm. Don't hesitate, because they won't. Dietrich handed over an ammunition belt, a canteen, and a trench knife. Then he climbed out of the foxhole and disappeared into the darkness, leaving Hargrove alone with his rifle and the weight of history pressing down on him like a granite slab. The first hour was silent. The second hour, the same. By the third hour, Hargrove's eyes had adjusted to the darkness, and he began to see the forest differently, not as a solid wall of black, but as layers of shadow, depth, texture. He could pick out individual trees, distinguish between fog and undergrowth, notice the faint differences in darkness where trails cut through the brush. His ears, too, sharpened. He filtered out the constant low rustle of wind, the occasional crack of distant artillery, and focused on the small sounds. The snap of a twig, the brush of cloth against bark, the faint scrape of boot on stone. At 0421 hours, he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as imagination, the soft compression of wet leaves under a careful footstep. 40 meters out, slightly left of the main trail. Hargrove didn't move, didn't adjust his position, didn't even shift his breathing. He just waited, rifle already shouldered, finger resting lightly on the trigger guard, eyes scanning the darkness where the sound had come from. Seconds passed. 10, 20, and then he saw it. A shape barely distinguishable from the surrounding shadows, moving parallel to the trail, slow and deliberate. A German scout, advancing in a low crouch, rifle slung across his back, eyes on the observation post. Hargrove tracked him smoothly, letting the shape move into clearer silhouette against a patch of slightly lighter fog. He didn't rush, didn't panic, just exhaled slowly, settled the front sight post on the center mass of the target, and squeezed the trigger. The M1903 cracked sharp and loud. The muzzle flashed briefly, lighting the forest like a camera bulb. 40 meters away, the German scout collapsed without a sound, dead before he hit the ground. Hargrove worked the bolt, ejecting the spent casing, chambering a fresh round, and scanned for movement. Nothing. Silence. He just killed his first German scout at Dead Man's Perch. 28 more would follow. The Germans didn't know what had just happened. Scouts operating in the Argonne relied on stealth darkness and the assumption that American sentries were poorly trained, nervous, and likely to fire wildly at shadows, giving away their positions. But Hargrove wasn't poorly trained, wasn't nervous, and he didn't fire wildly. He fired once, with precision, and then went silent again, invisible in his foxhole, waiting. 20 minutes later, a second scout appeared, this time approaching from the right, moving more cautiously, probably alerted by the earlier shot. Hargrove tracked him, led him close to 35 meters, and fired again. Another crack, another body. The scout dropped into the undergrowth and didn't move. Hargrove reloaded, scanned, waited. The pattern repeated. Every 20 or 40 minutes, another scout probed the perimeter, trying to locate the observation post, trying to determine how many men were defending it, trying to find an angle for a clean shot or a grenade throw. And every time, Hargrove saw them first, fired first, and killed them before they even knew they'd been targeted. By 0600 hours, when dawn began to gray the eastern sky, he killed 7 German scouts. 7 shots, 7 kills, 0 misses. When the relief detail arrived at 0630 hours, they found Hargrove still in position, rifle resting on the stone parapet, casings neatly piled beside him, face calm. The sergeant in charge of the relief stared at him, then stared at the forest, then stared back at Hargrove. "You okay, Corporal?" Hargrove nodded. "Fine, Sergeant." The sergeant hesitated. "We heard a lot of shooting. You get hit." Hargrove shook his head. "Not me. Them." He gestured toward the forest. The sergeant sent 2 men forward to scout. They came back 15 minutes later, pale and silent, and reported 7 German bodies. All of them scouts. All of them killed by single rifle shots, most of them within 50 meters of the post. The sergeant looked at Hargrove again, this time with something close to disbelief. "You did that? Alone?" Hargrove stood, slung his rifle, and started walking back toward the rear line. "Yes, Sergeant, I did." And that should have been the end of it. A successful defensive action. A few enemy scouts eliminated. A report filed and forgotten. But word spread fast in the trenches, and by that evening, every soldier in the battalion knew. The graveyard had a new tenant, and he didn't die easy. The German response was predictable and brutal. They couldn't allow a single American rifleman to shut down their scouting operations in a critical sector. On the night of October 8th, they sent a full squad, 12 men heavily armed, with orders to eliminate the observation post and whoever was defending it. Hargrove was back in position by 2100 hours, having volunteered for another night shift despite his platoon leader's suggestion that he rest. Hargrove refused. "They'll come back," he said simply, "and if I'm not there, whoever is won't last an hour." His platoon leader didn't argue, so Hargrove returned to Dead Man's Perch, settled into the foxhole, and waited. The Germans came at midnight, moving in 2 groups, one from the left flank, one from the right, coordinated, disciplined, trying to envelope the post from multiple angles. But Hargrove had anticipated this. He'd spent the afternoon memorizing the terrain, identifying natural choke points, calculating field to fire. When the first group advanced within range, he engaged the closest target, fired, worked the bolt, shifted aim, fired again, shifted, fired. 3 shots in 8 seconds. 3 Germans down. The survivors scattered, diving for cover, trying to locate the shooter. Hargrove didn't give them time. He shifted his aim to the second group, now rushing forward to support the first, and repeated the pattern. Aim, fire, bolt, aim, fire, bolt. 2 more down. The remaining Germans opened up a suppressive fire, rifles cracking the darkness, bullets chewing through the stone parapet and whistling past Hargrove's head. He dropped low, waited for the volley to pass, then rose and fired again. Another target, another kill. The firefight lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, 9 German soldiers lay dead or dying in the forest, and the survivors had retreated, dragging 1 wounded man with them. Hargrove reloaded, checked his ammunition. He'd fired 23 rounds and settled back into position. The graveyard had claimed 9 more. Over the next 4 nights, the pattern repeated with grim regularity. The Germans sent scouts. Hargrove killed them. The Germans sent squads. Hargrove killed them. The Germans sent snipers, positioning them in trees and behind ridges to counter-snipe the observation post. Hargrove spotted them first, using his Montana-trained eye to detect the unnatural stillness that marked a hidden shooter, and killed them before they could fire. By October 12th, Hargrove's confirmed kill count had reached 29, all of them within a 100-meter radius of Dead Man's Perch. All of them German scouts, snipers, or assault troops trying to take the post. His ammunition expenditure was astonishingly efficient. 34 rounds fired, 29 kills, 5 misses. 2 calls by targets moving behind cover mid-shot. 3 calls by extreme low-light conditions where even Hargrove's exceptional vision couldn't guarantee a hit. The American command took notice. Reports filtered up through battalion, regiment, division, all describing the same phenomenon. A single rifleman holding a position that squads had failed to hold, racking up kills at a rate that defied standard infantry performance. Some officers dismissed it as exaggeration. Others wondered if the reports were confusing multiple defenders with one. But when a reconnaissance team swept the forest around Dead Man's Perch and counted 29 German corpses, all killed by Springfield rifle fire, all bearing wounds consistent with precise, aimed shots, the skepticism evaporated. Alvin Hargrove wasn't exaggerating. He was just that good, but excellence in combat is a double-edged blade. The Germans, frustrated and humiliated by their inability to neutralize a single American soldier, escalated their response. On the night of October 13th, they didn't send scouts or squads. They sent artillery. At 0230 hours, German batteries began shelling the observation post with time barrages, try and destroy the position and kill whoever was defending it. Hargrove, warned by the distinctive whistle of incoming shells, abandoned the foxhole seconds before the first shell impacted, diving into a shallow ravine 20 meters away. The barrage lasted 8 minutes, turning Dead Man's Perch into a cratered ruin of shattered stone and splintered wood. When the shelling stopped, Hargrove crawled back to the position, assessed the damage. Foxhole collapsed, parapet destroyed, sight lines obscured by debris, and immediately began rebuilding. He used broken stones to create a new firing position, lower and less visible than the original, camouflaged with brush and dirt. By 0400 hours, he was back in position, rifle ready, scanning for targets. The Germans, assuming the post had been destroyed and its defender killed, sent a reconnaissance team at dawn to confirm. Hargrove killed the first scout at 60 meters, the second at 70, and the third at 85, forcing the survivors to retreat in confusion. Dead Man's Perch had survived, and so had Hargrove. His reputation by this point had transcended his unit. Soldiers from other companies requested transfers to Hargrove's sector, hoping to learn from him, to see him shoot, to witness the man who'd turned a graveyard into a fortress. Hargrove didn't encourage it, didn't give speeches or demonstrations. He just kept doing what he'd always done: observe, calculate, shoot, survive. But his presence had a tangible effect on morale. Knowing that Hargrove was in the observation post gave nearby units confidence to hold their positions, to push patrols deeper into the forest, to take risks they wouldn't have otherwise taken. The Germans, conversely, began avoiding the sector entirely. Intercepted communications, decoded weeks later, referenced the Argonne Devil and the Ghost Ridge Shooter, a sniper so deadly and invisible that German scouts refused orders to probe his position. Some units reported seeing muzzle flashes, but no shooter. Others reported hearing shots, but finding no bodies until daylight. A few claimed the shooter could see in the dark, could hear through fog, could kill at impossible ranges. The mythology grew, fed by fear and failure, until the real Alvin Hargrove, a quiet corporal from Montana who just happened to be an extraordinary marksman, became a legend that bore little resemblance to the man himself. The climax came on October 16, 1918, during the final German counteroffensive in the Argonne. Desperate to break the American advance before winter set in, German command ordered a concentrated night assault on the American line, targeting weak points and key positions. Dead Man's Perch, despite its reputation, was deemed too critical to leave in enemy hands. The Germans committed an entire platoon, 40 men, supported by machine guns and grenade launchers, to overrun the post in a single overwhelming assault. Hargrove, unaware of the scale of the attack, had taken his usual position at 2,100 hours, expecting another night of scattered probes and isolated firefights. When the assault began at 0145 hours, it came as a shock. Not a few scouts, but dozens of men advancing in coordinated waves, laying down suppressive fire, throwing grenades, pushing forward with the kind of aggression that suggested they knew exactly what they were up against and had decided to crush it with overwhelming force. Hargrove didn't panic, didn't retreat. He did what he always did. Aimed, fired, worked the bolt, aimed, fired. But this time, the targets were endless. He dropped the first wave's lead soldiers, forcing the rest to take cover. He shifted fire to the machine gun team setting up on the left flank, killing the gunner and forcing the crew to abandon the weapon. He engaged targets as they appeared, prioritizing officers, radiomen, grenade throwers, anyone whose death would disrupt coordination. His shooting was mechanical, almost robotic. Identify, aim, exhale, squeeze, bolt, repeat. The M1903 grew hot in his hands, the barrel radiating heat even in the cold October air. Casings piled at his feet. His shoulder ached from recoil. His ears rang from the constant crack of rifle fire. But he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Because the moment he stopped, the Germans would overrun the position and Dead Man's Perch would fall, and the entire junction would collapse, and men would die because he'd failed to hold. The firefight lasted 43 minutes. American reinforcements, alerted by the sustained gunfire, arrived at 0228 hours, a full platoon moving up from the rear to support Hargrove. But by the time they reached the observation post, the German assault had already broken. 22 German soldiers lay dead or wounded in the forest, cut down by Hargrove's rifle. The survivors had retreated, abandoning their wounded, fleeing back into the darkness. The American platoon found Hargrove still in position, rifle resting on the makeshift parapet, breathing heavily, face streaked with powder residue and dirt. The lieutenant in charge of the reinforcements stared at the carnage, then at Hargrove, then back at the carnage. "Corporal," he said slowly, "how many were there?" Hargrove didn't answer immediately. He ejected the last spent casing, reloaded, and only then looked at the lieutenant. "Enough," he said. And that was all he said. The official after-action report credited Hargrove with 29 confirmed kills over a 10-day period, October 7th to October 16th, 1918. All of them enemy scouts, snipers, or assault troops engaging American positions in the Argonne Forest. His ammunition efficiency, 39 rounds fired, 29 kills, was described as unprecedented and indicative of exceptional marksmanship under combat conditions. He was recommended for the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military decoration for valor, and his superior proposed using his tactics as a case study for infantry marksmanship training. But Hargrove refused the medal, refused the interviews, refused the attention. When asked why, he said simply, "I didn't do anything special. I just shot straight." His commanding officer tried to argue, tried to explain that what he'd done was extraordinary, that he'd saved lives and changed the tactical balance in a critical sector. Hargrove shook his head. "Every man here is doing his job," he said. "I'm just doing mine." And that was the end of it. The recommendation was filed but never processed. The case study was drafted but never published. And Alvin Hargrove returned to his unit. Just another rifleman, just another face in the line. The war ended 3 weeks later, on November 11th, 1918. Hargrove survived, returned to Montana in early 1919, and resumed his life as if the war had never happened. He worked as a forest ranger, then as a hunting guide, then as a small-town sheriff, spent his days in the same mountains and forests where he'd learned to shoot as a child. He never talked about the Argonne, never mentioned Dead Man's Perch, never told anyone about the 29 men he'd killed in 10 nights. When veterans groups invited him to reunions or memorial events, he politely declined. When historians tried to interview him about his service, he refused. When his grown children asked about the war, he said only that it was a long time ago and he didn't remember much. And for 60 years, that's where the story stayed, buried, forgotten, erased by Hargrove's own deliberate silence. It wasn't until 1982, 3 years after Hargrove's death at age 90, that the story resurfaced. A military historian named Dr. Raymond Tasker was researching individual acts of valor during the Meuse-Argonne offensive for a book on small unit tactics, when he stumbled across a series of after-action reports from the 77th Division describing a corporal who'd single-handedly defended a critical observation post for 10 consecutive nights, killing nearly 30 enemy soldiers with a bolt-action rifle. The reports were detailed, cross-referenced, and corroborated by multiple officers, but the corporal's name had been partially redacted due to a clerical error, leaving only Corporal H and a service number. Tasker spent 2 years tracking down the full identity, cross-referencing service records, interviewing surviving veterans, until he finally confirmed Corporal Alvin Hargrove, 77th Infantry Division, posthumously recognized as one of the most effective individual marksmen in American military history. Tasker published his findings in 1984 in a book titled Silent Guardians, Unsung Heroes of the Great War, dedicating an entire chapter to Hargrove's defense of Dead Man's Perch. The chapter included maps, tactical analysis, interviews with veterans who'd served alongside Hargrove, and a detailed breakdown of each confirmed kill. Military academies began teaching Hargrove's tactics as an example of how a single well-trained rifleman, using terrain and discipline, could hold a position against numerically superior forces. Marksmanship instructors use his ammunition efficiency as a benchmark, challenging students to achieve even a fraction of his accuracy under stress. And slowly, reluctantly, the story of the graveyard that became a killing field entered the canon of American military history, not as a grand battle or a famous victory, but as a testament to what one man with skill, courage, and a refusal to quit could accomplish when everything depended on him. The legacy of Alvin Hargrove isn't found in statues or monuments. It's found in the training manuals that now emphasize individual marksmanship over volume of fire, in the doctrine that teaches soldiers to hold key terrain even when outnumbered, in the understanding that sometimes in war, the most important asset isn't technology or numbers or firepower. It's a single competent person who refuses to fail. Hargrove didn't revolutionize warfare, didn't invent new tactics, didn't command armies or win battles. He just stood in a foxhole, night after night, and did what he'd been trained to do since childhood: observe, aim, shoot, survive. And in doing so, he proved that the ordinary can become extraordinary not through grand gestures or dramatic moments, but through relentless, disciplined excellence under the worst possible conditions. Dead Man's Perch no longer exists. The forest has reclaimed it. The stone observation post long since collapsed into rubble and overgrown with moss and ferns. But the name persists in military history, a reminder of a place where 3 men died trying to hold position, and 1 man lived by refusing to let it fall. Tourists visiting the Argonne today walk past the site without knowing its significance. Veterans who remember the story stand quietly for a moment, imagining what it must have been like to crouch in that foxhole, surrounded by darkness and death, with nothing but a rifle and the knowledge that surrender meant failure. And occasionally, a young soldier in a training course will hear the name Hargrove and ask who he was, and an instructor will tell the story. The corporal from Montana who turned a graveyard into a fortress, who killed 29 enemy soldiers in 10 nights, who refused a medal and went home to live a quiet life, and who proved that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war isn't the one you carry, it's the will to use it when it matters most. If this story moved your heart even once, subscribe. It's the least tribute we can give to men like him. And if you want more forgotten stories of courage and sacrifice, let us know where you're watching from in the comments below.